What AMD wants to do is they want to be able to compete directly with Intel, especially in large data systems. For the past several years, AMD was really seen as a low-cost provider to Intel, an alternative. In the last couple of years, though, they've done a lot of upgrading of their systems. Dr. Lisa Su has done a really good job of managing the company. They've built up some very sophisticated processors that compete very well with Intel, not just on price, but also on performance. And they have had a good story in CPUs. They had a good story in GPUs. What they didn't have a good story in was in accelerators. And there are a lot of workloads especially in large systems that need accelerators. For instance, 5G, Open RAN, virtual RAN kinds of systems use accelerators a lot, FPGAs in particular, AI, healthcare, video processing. And so what this buy does for AMD by acquiring Xilinx is it lets them create an environment where I can go to AMD for everything I need. I can get a CPU, I can get a GPU, and now I can get an accelerator if I'm trying to build out a platform to compete with Intel. And so this really raises the stakes in the competition for AMD against Intel. Now, there are a few issues. Intel probably is not just going to sit still and not do anything to counter this move. This is good for AMD in that it provides good competition for Intel, but Intel has a lot of resources. And they have other things besides just the FPGA. They have AI accelerators. They have smaller chips and a variety of other things that they can throw into the mix. So while this is easy for AMD to do now that their stock valuation is so high, it raises the competitive landscape for them. But it's not just, okay, now we're going to take over what Intel is doing. It's going to be a fight. Xilinx was doing fairly well on its own, but I think they see the writing on the wall, so to speak. Longer term, just selling an accelerator chip doesn't really make you a market leader. Longer term, what you need is an accelerator that's integrated with the processing elements, the CPU, the GPU. And what that means is being able to provide a network connection. It means being able to provide a software connection. It means being able to be fully integrated into a system cell, so you can sell the whole system together. And so AMD gives Xilinx a lot of leverage in a lot of different areas that they wouldn't have achieved on their own. On their own, they were just a component. With AMD, they can now provide a system. They're going after the same market, right? Intel acquired Altera, I guess it's 3 years now or something like that, because they also understood that they needed to have that kind of accelerator, especially in their network business, but also they wanted to have it for their autonomous vehicle business. Intel sells whole systems. They sell solutions. They don't want to sell just a component. Intel spends a lot of time not only creating chips, but also creating software. And so being able to bring in Altera gives them, again, a more complete solution that they can go to the market with and say, we have a whole system for you, not just components. It's stickier. It makes people say, oh, good, I'm going to stick with Intel because they sell me an entire system rather than just components that I have to build myself. That's what Intel wanted. So this is very similar. What AMD is doing with Xilinx is a very similar strategy, which is I want to sell a complete system, not just components. I think the difference with this deal is, if I understand the terms correctly, it's an all-stock transaction. So there really isn't a lot of money changing hands. So whatever money AMD has, they keep. It's just that they're now writing, new pieces of paper, basically, which is a stock. The bigger issue, I think, is going to be longer term, whether they can, not so much on the financial side, but on the engineering side, can they integrate the two companies? Can they work well together? What does the infrastructure look like, the social infrastructure, the engineering infrastructure look like in Xilinx and look like in AMD, and how do they bring that together? That's usually what causes problems when big companies are acquiring smaller companies. And also, will they lose some of the important scientists and engineers that made Xilinx what it is? I'm assuming that they were able to tie them up somehow, with, as they say, with golden parachutes or golden binders, handcuffs, or so to speak, to keep them on board. But I think that's going to be a big issue for them as well going forward. So it's too early to tell. We won't know that for a year, maybe 2 years. I think there are a couple of areas that AMD could do very well with Xilinx. Number one is that AMD is not a major player right now in the whole AI market. And so AMD, I think, is looking at Xilinx to help it in the AI market. The second market, and a very important market going forward for the next multiple years, is the telecom market. And if you look at the telecom market as we upgrade to 5G, as the world upgrades to 5G, it's a huge potential marketplace. The telecom providers, system providers, network providers are building radio access networks that need acceleration. They want to use off-the-shelf components. They don't want to have to go out and build custom chips because of the expense, but more importantly, because it takes a long time to get those built. FPGAs are great for radio access networks, for RANs, and that's another area that AMD wants to go after. And the final area, I think, is autonomous vehicles. It's not just cars, but it's all kinds of robotics and autonomous vehicles. FPGAs as accelerators for those kinds of devices are great because I can program an algorithm that I think is the right one. If I make that in silicon, I'm stuck with the silicon. If I put it in an FPGA and it isn't right, I can change it. And so in the early stages, you really want to build everything into a programmable accelerator rather than a hard design silicon accelerator. And that gives them a big advantage there. So I think those are some of the key markets. There are others in healthcare, in smart cities. There's a lot of other areas where algorithm design is not really totally firm yet. People are still experimenting. And so I think that's where AMD wants to play with Xilinx. And I think it makes sense for them to do that.